I can't believe we're already doing an October garden tour. And to be honest, not a lot has changed in terms of what was planted. So this time I thought we could talk about something I think everybody should be considering this time of year. And that's actually how your garden is laid out. Because at this point in the year, you've lived with your garden space for a while now, you've seen it through an entire summer, and you probably have some ideas of what made it work and what didn't work so well for you. But by next spring, when you're actually ready to implement those changes, it's really easy to have forgotten what was bothering you so much. So I highly encourage you to do a little garden walk around like I'm about to do here and just think about what you might want to change. By far the biggest change to the garden this year was the greenhouse area and tea garden. We added this entire gravel pad, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second, but that was so that we could place the greenhouse, and we also added 5 new raised beds. This was not the original plan for this area. Originally, I was actually going to have 3 beds, double this length, over here. But I realized that it really didn't work for the flow of things. Our kitchen is up there, so we would come down these stairs and into this area, and if we had to get through the raised bed boxes, over to the seating area and the fire pit with things that we were maybe cooking over the fire or our drinks or whatever, the flow just wasn't there. Also visually, I just feel like having them lined up with the center of the greenhouse doors is just a lot stronger. Once I got these in place, I then realized that it made this entire section here feel really empty and just like the whole pad was floating in space. I did add 2 more beds here. These are 6 foot by 2 foot beds that are elevated. And this was really nice because we were able to add the tomatoes to these beds and kind of create a privacy screen for our neighbors. Our neighbors are the best, but they don't necessarily want their house all over social media. They've never complained, but I just feel like it gave them a little bit more of a screen from me while I was filming in here. Now I have pulled out the tomatoes from this bed. All that's left in here right now is marigolds and leeks, but I did do a direct sowing of a bunch of different fall crops that I'm hoping will have time to germinate and come up before it gets too cold. I've been working really hard to kind of establish the greenhouse as its own separate area within the wider tea garden itself. And of course that's much easier in the fall when we have beautiful mums that we can decorate with, but the green stalks too just add a lot of intentionality to the space and really frame out the door beautifully. The tea garden is still my favorite thing that I did in this area, and I'm really happy with how they're spaced out too. There's just enough space to comfortably walk in between them. I believe it's about 21 to 24 inches. And this is a really important consideration when you're deciding where to put elevated beds like this especially. A raised bed is going to be off the ground, of course, but something like this, where the bed comes up to my hip height, it's just extra important that you don't feel claustrophobic moving in between the 2 beds. You can get your tools in and out easily. The tea garden has been great though, because I feel like in the vegetable garden, things are really like seasonal, and we end up having waves where certain times of the year it will look really good and other times not so much. Whereas the tea garden has looked beautiful all spring, all summer, and all fall. I did adjust this bed because we had the pineapple sage in here and I'd never pruned it properly. It was so unhappy. So we just put a mum in here. Technically it's still a tea plant because you can make tea with it. And then a bunch of other random things like lettuce, some broccoli is getting munched, and a rosemary plant that I really need to move into the greenhouse for the winter. The hibiscus is also still going strong. I love having a hibiscus plant as like a centerpiece in the garden. I think they're so beautiful. They just keep going and going. The blooms are definitely getting smaller this time of year, but still so beautiful. Of course, I need to do some weed whacking, but you can see that the gravel pad is lined with these kind of 4x4 posts, and that does help to define the space. But I think what really helped to define the space this summer, and you'll just have to excuse how overgrown everything is right now, is adding these whiskey barrels to the corners to really anchor everything. So putting it all together, you get a very intentional space that offers like a bunch of different ways to utilize it. Of course, the seating area is just a beautiful, relaxing spot now that it's cooled off here. And this is also my first year growing celery because I don't really like celery, but it is such an easy plant to grow. I haven't had any issues with it at all. Whenever I plant something new for the first time that's new to me, I usually just stick it in the ground. I'll very briefly kind of glance over any growing instructions, but I find that a lot of times the instructions aren't going to be specific to my climate. So I really want to just see how it does and experiment with it the first year that I'm growing with it, and then make adjustments from there. With the celery, I just threw it in the ground and left it, and it's been so happy. I don't even think I've fertilized that bed, to be honest. These two containers have not been anchoring the space quite as well as I wanted it to. I do feel like there's pros and cons to wood chips and gravel. Of course, we had to do the gravel over here for the sake of the load bearing for the greenhouse, and I already had wood chips over here. I prefer this more natural look. Both of them have problems with weeds. I did not do a weed barrier under this gravel because honestly, it wasn't going to make a very big difference. Weeds can still germinate on that weed barrier. It just makes the area less permeable. It won't drain as well. So with gravel, there is some trade-off because you are still going to have issues with weeds. I have some garlic mustard going crazy right here. One thing that I found that was really effective was to actually use a flamethrower. So weeding this area has not been that big of a deal because I just hook up my propane, camp fuel to it, turn it on, and spend 20 minutes burning things. I cannot do that in the wood chips. And the wood chips also allow me to grow the wine cap mushrooms I love so much that are just starting to pop back up now that the weather is cooling off. Overall, I prefer the natural look and the versatility of the wood chips, even though even with my cardboard, I still get weeds coming up and I have to refresh this fairly regularly every year. I think it would be nice to have something maybe a little bit bigger on these corners to define the space a little bit better. But there's no arguing that these arches help define the space too, and the arches have been so much happier this year. Last year, I didn't do a great job of keeping on top of planting new stuff. So we had a round of cucumbers, but then by the time the snap peas came up, like it was too cold, so there just wasn't as much growing on them throughout the whole season. This year I did cucumbers on the front 2 rows, and the back row had tomatoes on it all summer long. There's still a few on here that I need to pull, but I did succession sow peas along all of these trellises. So there will be green on here for at least another month. I really overplanted the zinnias. As you can see, they're starting to get powdery mildew. They're ready to come out. It's just hard for me to pull the trigger because they do add so much beautiful, beautiful color. I think I just didn't really keep in mind that the beds are already elevated. So adding something so tall on top of that really makes it so you can't see everything else, all the other beds behind it. So next year, I'm going to try to be more strategic about planting lower flowers at the front, medium flowers in the next row, and then my tallest flowers in the back, which I did do with my cosmos this year. But they are too tall for this bed and not really well supported. These frames are a new addition this fall that I'm testing out. I will be putting a frost cloth on this. Also comes with an insect cover and it is custom sized for these raised beds. So far, so good. Assembly was really easy. They're pretty sturdy in here. They just sit in place, and then there's landscaping staples that secure it down. This structure doesn't support a snow load, but I'm really going to push the limits of it because I want to test it for you guys and see how it does once we get those covers on for winter. I've planted out both of these middle rows for fall with tons and tons of stuff. Herbs have really started to go to flower here. I have some oregano right there that I need to cut back. Also a ton of thyme right here. The nasturtiums always get so happy this time of year. These are the purple emperor nasturtiums, and I also have this Thai basil that's ready to be cut. So we need to do a whole harvest video of just herbs, I think. I'm really waiting as long as I can to pull out the peppers, but you can see the color has changed on them significantly. They're very yellow. If you look side by side with the fresh stuff that's been planted, they're just on their last legs. They're about done, but I'm hesitating to pull them out because I know it's gonna leave a big bare spot back here and look very barren, and I don't want to do it until I absolutely have to. The spacing of these beds was of course dictated by the width of the arches, so they're about 4 feet apart, and then we've got a 2-foot gap in between each of the beds, and I've had no problems with that. It's just wide enough for a wheelbarrow to fit through. And having this kind of grassy area to break it up between the two spaces, I think it's really nice because it gives you kind of two separate sections of the garden with two very different purposes and feels to them. The hardest area that we have to deal with in the garden, probably over the next few months, is this section back here where the tree fell. The tree fell and we had an issue where a lot of weeds took advantage of the opportunity to move in. This is normally where we have our asparagus, our rhubarb, and our garlic. And the asparagus was thankfully already done for the season, so that's okay. But we have to clear all of this to get it reset for next spring. The asparagus and rhubarb will come back, but there's just a bunch of empty spaces in between things that I really need to start companion planting in to keep these aggressive weeds from taking control again. Let me know what you think I should plant here. I'm thinking something small like calendula or strawberries or something like that. The hero of the vegetable garden this year has to be the Swiss chard. It is just so reliable. I really don't have any problems with pest pressure, and it's very, very productive and beautiful. It adds some really nice color to the garden. This is the bed that we chaos sowed all our fall crops in. So most of these are actually radishes that are ready to come up. We've got a bunch of mustards starting up. And this is the lentils that I started from grocery store lentils. I don't know at this point if they're gonna have time to reach maturity in order to harvest them before the first frost, but honestly, I think they are so pretty. They have really nice foliage, and I think I'm gonna plant more of them next year just for the greenery, and they're really good at fixing nitrogen in the soil too. We've got some picture perfect lettuce going here, and I'm waiting impatiently to see some arugula pop up in here. I'm really missing arugula right now. I just want that kind of zingy flavor. Got some Violetta pak choi going. This area needs a second sowing. I don't know what happened here. A lot of the stuff that I chaos sowed just never came up. All of this is calendula, which will keep going, doesn't mind the cold at all. I do have these new trellises, which I will link for you. They get really, really tall. With these, I've got some snap peas on that I just had extra of, just to give us some more height in this empty area of the front of the garden. We did a big push this spring to get this whole section of the garden finished and done, and honestly, I don't want to do another big project next spring, so I think it's mostly gonna stay the way that it is. I was able to make really good intentional decisions when we started, so I don't have any big regrets with how we laid out this area, but I'm excited to see how it continues to evolve. I'm sure little changes will add up over time. Let me know in the comments what you're changing in your garden. Make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. Thank you for gardening with me, and happy growing.